Welcome back. I'm David the Good, and welcome back. I'm David the Good. I'm here with Emmanuel from Ultimate Gardening. We just did a tour through the food forest. If you go over to his channel, you can check it out. I will put a link below. He needs to get over 3,000 subscribers, and if you're down in South Florida and you want to learn about gardening here, he's got a great take on it and working in a small urban backyard. So check out Emmanuel. He's a friend of mine, and I will put a link to him below. Welcome back. I'm in the Great South Florida Food Forest Project, which is a little food forest I planted over 12 years ago. And I am pollarding a mulberry. This mulberry has been pollarded before. This being a backyard that is small. You see how tall this tree is. It's about, I think, it's coming up on 30 feet or so. And that's a lot for this space here. So we're just pollarding it out right now, cutting it back down again so it's harvestable. We'll get mulberries hopefully within reach. Plus, this tree has not produced mulberries particularly well ever, because I think it really likes a little bit of cool season, and it's not cool down here in Fort Lauderdale. So I'm hoping that by cutting it back again, it's going to stimulate fruit production on the new growth. Right now you can see there's yams up in here. Probably can't see it by staring into the sun, but I'll pull one down. There are some huge, absolutely massive yam vines in here that are making great big yam bulbils. And I planted yams all through here. This is your South Florida survival crop. And South Florida has some really interesting and difficult conditions that you've got to work with. But on the other hand, it's one of the most productive places you could ever hope to have a garden. And that's what I've been trying to teach people for years, is that just because you live in South Florida, or you live anywhere in Florida for that matter, it's not a place that it's a gardening wasteland, just because it's not like Michigan or upstate New York or wherever you might have come from and moved here. Most people have been transplanted down here. You can build soil here and grow incredible gardens. You just have to know what to do. And like this is probably unfamiliar to you if you've moved to this state. And most people that live in the state don't know what these are. These are the aerial roots of a true yam. And the yams that we grow here get up to 20 or 30 feet. It's not a sweet potato, it's a yam. And it's rather like a white potato when you cook it. That's your survival root crop. If you're afraid of the apocalypse, you need to learn about true yams and grow them in Florida. They will grow in the terrible sand. Today what I want to do is start from the ground up. I just happened to be pollarding when we started filming, but that kind of segues nicely into building up the soil. If we start with the soil, you can grow a lot more. So let me show you what I'm doing with the soil here to make it much better than you would expect. When you're in South Florida, you'll see lots of well-manicured little landscapes that are mostly just grass and some ornamentals, some palms, but the soil is really bad. It's just like sand. So instead of fixing that, what most people are doing is taking all of their cuttings, their grass clippings, they're taking their leaves, they're taking all the branches they cut down, and they're sticking them in the yard waste bins by the side of the road. The tiny amount of fertility that is in the yard already is then getting exported and chipped up or shredded or thrown away somewhere off of your property. You don't want to do that. Every bit of yard waste that you can get, find a place to put it back into your yard, or a way to put it back into your yard that makes it useful. There are lots of clever ways to do that. This is a backyard, so we don't have to worry about it looking pretty. So we can just do what God does and drop stuff on the ground. If there's a windfall, stuff falls on the ground and it rots into the soil. So you take your sticks and you put them back in. Of course, when you've got nice long straight sticks like this is great for a little backyard rocket stove or a fire pit. you could lay these sticks aside and throw all the thin pieces back into the ground. But just smashing them up a bit and throwing them on the ground, there, is good enough. We've been working on the soil in this food forest for 12 years, and there's a remarkable difference, and that remarkable difference could go away very quickly if we weren't careful about it. So we're not tilling the ground, we're never stripping it completely bare, we're not emptying it of plants to the ground anywhere, because if you do that, it turns back into sand. This is the native soil, if you could call it that. Right here. That's what it looks like. It's very pale and very sad. So if we go back here, you can see all of these sticks that have been dropped on the ground. We've been doing this for years now, dropping sticks on the ground over and over and over again. You can see these are very old, and they just crumble up and they fall into the soil. But underneath it, look at this. There's one of my workers right there. That's a millipede, and he's doing good work. So there's our soil and our original sand, and even this original sand isn't as bad as it could have been, because there's a lot of roots through here, and there's been some debris that's fallen here and there. There's actually some organic matter in there, but this is really what you want to see. And a lot of this is insect frass, which means insect droppings, but it sounds fancier. If you dig down in here, even underneath, get back down, that's what the soil looks like underneath that layer, but that's still got more organic matter in it. That's pretty good stuff. I mean, by South Florida standards, that's incredible. You can't buy soil like that in a bag down here. Most of the time, if you go out and say, I'm gonna go buy some soil, you'll end up with something that's about half decayed, chopped up wood chips and sand. This is absolutely full of life. So you can see there's ground cover all over the ground. It looks like a great big mess. Every time there's something that we chop up, we throw it back on the ground and cover the ground up. And there's plants that we planted in here deliberately to do that with. This being one of them. This is the Mexican sunflower. Anytime you put in your fruit trees, you put some of these guys in here too, and you chop them up and you chuck them on the ground. And they break up really easily. And they're full of phosphorus in particular, but they've got a lot of other minerals. You're just making a jungle right here and dropping it. Boom. The first most important thing is to keep the ground covered with something, and particularly just keep dropping that organic matter. If this means robbing the neighbor's yard waste bins, that's great, do that. Just throw stuff on the ground constantly, let it rot back into the soil. And however you have to do that. Now I know that some of you guys are going to be dealing with like really fancy schmancy. There's a lot of fancy schmancy stuff down in South Florida. You know, like you buy a little itty bitty house here and it costs $1 million. So people want to keep things really super nice. So you have to be a little clever about it, you know, keep things out of view. But if you're working in a front yard or something, just mulch well. Just wherever you can get mulch from. Some of the cities have chip drops and stuff where you can get it. Landscape companies, whatever, mulch it really nicely and keep putting stuff back on the ground. And your own sticks and debris and leaves and everything, try to put them in your backyard somewhere, stick them in a corner, hide it somehow, make it pretty, because you really need that. We have almost no soil here, and almost all of the fertility is tied up in the plants that are growing on top of the ground, not in the ground itself. So if you bare and denude everything, it rapidly just turns into a patchy, sandy wasteland. And you don't want that. So think about that first. all the organic matter is going back into the ground. Every time you eat a banana, go take a banana peel and throw it at the base of one of your banana trees, or throw it at the base of your mango tree, or bury it into your rosemary pot, or whatever you've got to do, but get that stuff back into the ground. Don't export the limited fertility you already have. Secondarily, you see this? This is a Suriname cherry. I started this from a seed. Do you know how much work I've put into this? This whole area, obviously, it doesn't look like I've put a ton of work into it, right? It's not all pruned, it's not all perfectly layered, there's not, you know, everything's not super organized. I put almost no work into this. I planted it, I watered it in, and I've ignored it for 10 years, except for maybe throwing a little bit of manure or something around it every once in a while when I'm down here. I only visit this system maybe once or twice a year. There were multiple years I never made it here at all, and it's doing perfectly fine. It loves it. So here's a trick about South Florida. South Florida wants to be a forest. Seriously wants to be a forest. It doesn't want to be St. Augustine grass. It wants to be a forest. It naturally covers itself. So if your gardening is focused on little raised beds and trying to grow tomatoes and trying to grow cabbages and things like that, your gardening is very high effort. If you want gardening on the almost zero effort setting, go and buy some perennial fruiting plants. Any kind of perennial tree, shrub, vegetable, like Mexican tree spinach. You can grow the true yams, bananas, plantains, mangoes, taro. Think of the entire bounty of the tropics and what could grow in the tropics. This is the tropics, and it wants to be a forest. So even though the soil is terrible here, look at this beautiful green, happy plant. It loves it. There's abundant rainfall, and it's a perfect, mild, wonderful climate. But if I had planted cabbages or something like that back here, and I didn't stay on top of them every single day, they wouldn't be here anymore. This is the dry season right now. This doesn't have any fruit on it or anything, but it hasn't been watered, and it's beautiful, deep green, and it'll make cherries a little later in the year. And the same thing is true for whatever trees you plant here. Often once the roots find the water table, which is very close here, you don't have to take care of them very much. Just spend some time on them in the first couple of years. And if things are getting too big, prune them back. Everything grows back here. A mango doesn't have to be 60 feet tall or 90 feet tall. You know, your mulberry doesn't have to be gigantic. Your cherry hedges don't have to be huge. You can control things by judicious pruning and getting stuff back underneath control. And the main thing that we lack during the dry season here is it's subject to drought, and you may not get enough water to make your bananas and plantains happy. So if you're saying like, man, my stuff is just not growing that fast, just try throwing some more water on it. And be sure to just keep mulching and throwing stuff around the base to rot down. Biological activity happens so quickly here that if you chop down a tree and you take the chunks of trunk and stick them around the base of one of your other trees to feed it, that will turn into beautiful spongy compost in a year or two. Really, really quickly. Most wood is just decaying and falling to pieces. You'll flip it over, there'll be a bunch of millipedes and worms and snails and other things under it, and there'll just be all of this brown fluff. We threw so many logs into this system, and in a very short period of time, it was breaking down into organic matter. So you want to keep that sponge going. Just keep dropping stuff on the ground around your trees. Give them a little water if they're not happy. Give them a little bit of fertilizer if they're not happy. But if you concentrate on perennials first and concentrate on building that soil and keeping that soil covered, you're not going to build it long term if you tear it up. It just won't. And it's not going to stay long term unless you let it keep getting fed. If you've got trees that are dropping leaves on top of it, leave the leaves. Don't go raking them up and sending them away. Let them rot down into the ground and feed it, and you will have tons and tons and tons of food in your Florida yard. Super simple. Just remember those two things. Perennials, keep dropping stuff on top of the soil. Keep the soil covered. Also remember, all you really need for gardening in South Florida is a machete. Just get yourself a good machete. This is a Tramontina from Brazil. I love these things. They're really good. Get a good machete, and then you can do all of your chopping and dropping. You can dig with it, and you can, you know, kill alligators with it peacefully and respectfully. Kill alligators with it. hopefully before they eat your neighbor's poodle. And you got like an all-around tool right here. I use the machete constantly. I mean, you can get fancy and get a battery-powered chainsaw or something like that, but you can do almost everything with a machete. Just remember that. And if you want to learn more about gardening in South Florida, check out the South Florida Gardening Survival Guide. We planted this tree when it was 4 foot tall. It's 30 foot tall now. It's made thousands of pounds of mangoes. Fantastic mangoes. We've got a star fruit over there that's made thousands of pounds of fruit, and we're talking so little work to make this happen. If you know what you're doing, you can really, really, really grow food here. So that's the South Florida Gardening Survival Guide. If you are interested in building a food forest system, you can check out Create Your Own Florida Food Forest. It's a great big thick book I did with lots of plant profiles. It's lots of fun for plant geeks, and it gives you an idea how to turn your backyard into a system like this, an amazing jungle that feeds you year after year after year with very little work. So check those out. I'll put links below. Thanks for joining me. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe. We talk a lot about Florida gardening. We also talk about gardening in the South. I live in Alabama, just over the Florida border. I'm a native Floridian, and we try to keep things really simple and figure out how to grow as much food for as little work as possible. Catch you next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be green. Hey, I'm David the Good, and this is Emmanuel.
Hello.
Welcome back. I'm David the Good, and we're standing in the great South Florida Food Forest Project, which I planted in my parents' backyard a long time ago. And Emmanuel is doing something very similar in his parents' backyard.
Yep, I am.
We've been talking back and forth for what, probably a year.
About around a year, yeah.
He said, "Do you want to collaborate?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then I just completely ignored it.
Past multiple months, and then he's like, "Hey, I'm coming. You want to meet?"
Glad to hear it.